All right, strap in everyone, because today we are going deep on The Lean Startup by Eric Ries.
You know, it's a classic.
It is. We're going right to the source, too.
Oh, nice.
Direct excerpts from the book, so we can really get you thinking differently about how to build businesses. Forget those, like, massive business plans.
The ones that just sit on a shelf.
Yeah, exactly. Whether you're, like, a total startup veteran or just got an idea that you're playing around with, the Lean Startup gives you a totally different way of thinking about navigating that crazy world of starting something new.
And I think that's what's so cool about it. It's not just for, like, tech companies in Silicon Valley.
Right.
It's for anybody who's trying to do something new, something innovative.
It really is. And Ries, right out of the gate, kind of throws you a curveball.
Oh, yeah.
With his definition of a startup.
Okay.
He says it's not about, like, being small or new.
Interesting.
It's about any group of people who are dealing with a problem where the solution, like, nobody knows what it is.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of in the unknown.
Totally. And that could be a team inside, like a huge company, or, it could be, those two people in a garage.
So it's really broadening the definition of who an entrepreneur is.
Totally.
It's not just the stereotypical tech founder.
It's not. I like that.
Yeah.
It kind of takes the pressure off, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not expected to have all the answers.
Right from the start.
Right away. Ries even gives this example of Mark.
Oh, okay.
Who worked in, like, a giant corporation. He had this amazing team, this super supportive boss.
Wow.
And he had a clear vision for, what he wanted to create.
Sounds like he had it all.
He did. But he still felt like something was missing.
Ah, there's that spark.
Yes. And that's where the Lean Startup comes in. It gives you this framework. It's almost like a process.
Yeah.
For turning those ingredients, even in a big company, into results. Especially when you were in that uncharted territory.
You're in the unknown. You don't know what the answers are.
You don't know. And so one of the core ideas that Ries talks about is this concept of validated learning.
Okay.
He says this should be the metric, like the measurement.
Oh, interesting.
For startups.
Yeah.
Not just, hitting deadlines or looking really busy.
No, it's not about being busy. It's about being effective.
Exactly.
And knowing that you're moving in the right direction.
And that's what validated learning is all about. It's not just churning out work. It's about constantly testing.
Testing what?
To see if what you're building is actually the right thing.
Ah, okay.
Testing your assumptions against what's happening in the real world.
So you're saying you need to be in touch with reality.
Yes.
You can't just be in your own little bubble.
You can't be in the bubble.
And this is where that story about IMBU comes in, right?
Yes. This story is so good.
What's the story?
So Ries co-founded this company.
Okay.
And they started with, what they thought was this brilliant idea.
Okay.
Like a 3D avatar add-on for, like, instant messaging.
So, like, back in the AIM days?
Exactly. They spent forever, like, perfecting the technology.
They wanted to get it just right.
They did. They even started charging for it early on.
Wow, confident.
Very confident. But nobody was buying it.
What? Nobody?
Nobody.
Even though they thought it was such a great idea?
I know, right? Even with this seemingly amazing product and all that effort.
Didn't want it.
It wasn't what people wanted.
So they had to pivot.
They had to.
They had to change direction.
They had to ditch the original plan and build something totally different based on what they were learning by watching how real people were using the product.
So it's a classic example of validated learning in action.
It is, and it's what ultimately led to their success.
So you're saying even with a great idea, you might have to change course.
You might. And that brings us to, this really important concept, the minimum viable product, or MVP.
Right, the MVP.
Now, this is where some people, get it wrong.
Oh, how so?
They think it's about putting out this half-baked product just to get it out there.
Just to check a box.
Yeah, just to, be able to say you launched.
Got it.
But Ries is saying, no, it's about something way smarter than that.
What is it really about?
It's about finding the riskiest part of your idea
Okay.
and designing, a test or an experiment
Interesting.
to see if your assumption is actually true.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The faster you learn,
Yeah.
the faster you can adapt.
The faster you can improve.
Exactly.
And Ries gives those awesome examples in the book, right?
Yes.
Cool.
Like Groupon, starting with, this really simple WordPress blog and PDF coupons for, wait for it, pizza.
Pizza. That's hilarious.
I know. It's so funny.
So you're saying even the biggest successes started small,
They did.
started scrappy.
Super scrappy.
That's encouraging.
Right.
So it's not about having this perfect product right from the start.
It's not.
It's about getting something out there, learning and iterating.
Yes. And then there's Aardvark, if you heard of them.
Yeah. They were acquired by Google, right?
They were. And they went through all these different pivots, like multiple pivots, based on what they were learning from each version of their MVP.
So they were constantly experimenting and adapting.
They were. And they just kept refining and testing until they found the right problem to solve.
Which ultimately led to that acquisition.
Exactly.
Cool.
Right. But I have a question for you. How do you balance this need for speed, like getting it out there fast, with creating something that's high quality?
That's a great question, and something a lot of people struggle with.
Right. Especially if you take pride in your work. Putting out something minimum, can feel kind of icky.
Right. Nobody wants to put out something that's subpar.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to remember that the MVP is about learning.
Not perfection.
Exactly. It's about getting that feedback, those crucial data points, as quickly as possible.
So it's about getting to that, aha moment as quickly as possible.
Yes. Even if it's not perfect, even if it's a little rough around the edges.
Okay. So you've got your MVP out there. How do you measure if you're actually making progress?
Yeah, that's a good point. The traditional ways of measuring success might not work for a startup.
They might not.
Especially one that's operating in uncharted territory.
Right. So this is where Ries introduces this concept of innovation accounting.
Okay.
And it's about tracking whether you are moving the needle, making actual progress on your key assumptions.
So you're saying it's not just about seeing, vanity metrics go up?
No. It's about actual learning. Are you getting smarter about your business? Are you getting closer to that product market fit?
Makes sense. You need to be learning and adapting along the way.
Exactly. And Ries uses Grocket as an example.
Oh, yeah, Grocket, the test prep company.
Yeah. And they were initially focused on these vanity metrics, like
Yeah.
how many users they had in total.
Which can be tempting to focus on.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
It looks good on paper, right? Big numbers.
Big numbers, but they don't always tell the whole story.
They don't.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were growing, but they weren't really learning what was driving that growth.
They weren't understanding what their customers were really responding to.
They weren't. And it wasn't until they started doing things like, A/B testing
Okay.
and focused on these, more actionable metrics.
The ones that give you insights.
Yes. That they were able to figure out what was actually working.
So it's not just about growth. It's about the right kind of growth.
And understanding what's driving it.
Sustainable growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this kind of naturally leads to this concept of the pivot.
Ah, the pivot, which can be scary.
It can, but Ries is very clear that it's not a failure.
So what is it?
It's It's crucial.
Crucial?
It's crucial for startups. It's about being able to adapt
Adapt to what?
to new information. And it's
Mhm.
about using data to make smart decisions. Like,
Yeah.
when should you change your strategy? How should you change it?
And he uses Vodazin as an example.
He does. And they went through, multiple pivots.
In each one.
Brought them closer to understanding their customer, their market, their whole reason for existing.
So it's like course correcting.
It is. It's not this, crash landing. It's about using what you've learned to find a better path.
A more effective path.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so we've talked about, validating assumptions, building MVPs,
Right.
pivoting when things aren't working.
Yeah.
But how do startups actually grow? How do they scale?
That's the million-dollar question. How do you go from, the small idea to something big and impactful?
Exactly.
And Ries introduces this idea of engines of growth.
Oh, yeah. And he's really clear that there's no, one-size-fits-all approach here.
Every startup needs to find what works for them.
They do. They need to find that right engine for sustainable growth, not just, one-time bursts.
It's got to be something that can keep propelling you forward.
Yes. And he breaks these engines down into three main categories, right?
Yeah, let's hear him.
Sticky, viral, and paid. And he uses these companies that we all know to illustrate how each one works.
I like that. Real-world examples.
Right. So think Facebook for viral growth.
They're the kings of going viral.
Right. And then Dropbox.
Yeah.
They're all about sticky growth.
Yeah.
Because they're so good at retaining their users.
People love Dropbox.
They do. It just works. And then there's Salesforce.
The powerhouse.
Yes. They're an example of paid growth. They use capital to acquire customers.
They're not afraid to invest in growth.
They're not. So you see, each company kind of finds their own unique path.
Using the strengths of that particular engine.
Exactly.
It's like finding the right fuel for your rocket ship.
I love that. It's not just about having a great idea. It's about understanding how to validate it, how to adapt, and then how to find that right way to grow.
And that's what makes the lean startup so valuable.
It gives you a roadmap for navigating that journey.
And for building something truly successful.
Exactly. But building a startup, it's not just about marketing and sales,
Oh,
right?
there's so much more to it.
It's about what's happening inside the company.
It's about the culture, the team, the processes.
It's about building a company that can actually support that growth and that innovation.
A company that can adapt.
Yes. And so Rise draws inspiration from, like, the principles of lean manufacturing.
Oh, interesting. So we're talking about applying those factory floor efficiencies to startup.
We are.
That's pretty cool.
Think about Toyota, you know?
Yeah, Toyota's production system is legendary.
It is. And they work in small batches. They have these, like, really fast feedback loops.
So you're saying that startups can learn a lot from how Toyota operates.
I think they can. It's about optimizing for learning, not just individual efficiency.
So it's not about working harder, it's about working smarter.
Yes. And even if you're not building a physical product, you can still use these principles to create a more, adaptable, responsive organization.
More agile.
More agile, yes.
And one technique that Ries highlights is the 5 whys method.
Oh, the 5 whys. I love this one.
It's a simple way to get to the root cause of problems.
It's powerful, though.
It is.
But hold on. Are you saying that asking why 5 times can really uncover the real problem?
It can. It might seem simplistic, but it forces you to go beyond those surface-level explanations, to dig deeper.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion.
Exactly. And Ries talks about how IMVU used this method when they had customers complaining about a new release that broke a key feature.
Oh, so it wasn't just a technical glitch.
No, they had to dig deeper. And by asking why repeatedly, they found out that the real problem wasn't the code itself.
What was it?
It was a lack of training for the team that released it.
Oh, wow.
Their manager hadn't prioritized training, which led to the error.
Interesting. So by asking why, they were able to pinpoint the root cause.
And then fix it and prevent it from happening again.
That's so powerful. Ries also uses this really detailed case study from Intuit.
Intuit, the company behind QuickBooks.
Yeah. And it really illustrates the power of small batches.
Okay, tell me more.
So they were stuck in this, really long, drawn-out development cycle.
Spending months building a new version before getting any feedback.
Months. They were essentially building in the dark.
And that can be so wasteful.
So wasteful.
Yeah.
Because they only got feedback after they had already invested a ton of time and energy.
So how did they break free from that?
Well, this product manager named Greg came in.
Okay.
And he just, completely changed things. He got rid of the old way of doing things and implemented this system based on small batches and fast feedback.
He had to overcome some resistance, I'm sure.
I'm sure he did. But the results were amazing. Customer satisfaction went up, and they could release new features way faster.
So even a giant company like Intuit was able to embrace the lean startup mindset.
They were. It's not just for brand new companies.
It's a way of thinking.
It is. It's about creating this culture of continuous learning and experimentation no matter where you are in your journey.
Love it.
This is great. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. But it's all starting to click for me. It's not just about launching a product. It's about building the system for learning and adapting.
It is. Before we move on, what's resonating with you so far? What are some of the takeaways that you're already thinking about applying to your own work?
Well, I think the key here is that in a world that's full of uncertainty, the ability to learn and adapt is your greatest strength.
So good. We'll be back in a minute with more from the Lean Startup.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the foundation of the Lean Startup, but things get really interesting when Ries starts talking about how to apply these ideas, inside a company that's already growing.
Right, because at that point, you've got this existing business that's, hopefully doing well.
Hopefully.
But you also need to keep innovating. You need to find new sources of growth.
It's almost like this paradox, right?
Yeah, it is. It's like you're celebrating success on one hand.
But on the other, yeah.
You need to be prepared to disrupt yourself.
Yes. And Ries really emphasizes this idea of nurturing disruptive innovation.
Meaning?
Creating these spaces where teams can, experiment without being bogged down by, all the bureaucracy.
So they can move quickly. They can try new things.
They can. And he even uses this term, islands of freedom.
I love that. It paints such a vivid picture.
It does. And these are spaces where teams can operate with more autonomy.
Almost like internal startups within the larger organization.
Exactly. And he also mentions this idea of a sandbox,
Yeah.
like a protected environment, where teams can experiment without putting the whole company at risk.
Right, because you don't want to like bet the farm on every new idea.
You don't.
Yeah.
But how do you actually set that up? Like, how do you create a sandbox that's both effective and safe?
It's a balancing act. You need clear guidelines, you need ways to measure if they're actually succeeding.
Metrics.
Yeah, metrics. And those metrics need to align with the company's goals.
Right. It can't just be random experimentation.
And perhaps most importantly, there needs to be open communication.
Okay.
The innovation team and everyone else.
So it's not just about letting them run wild.
Right. No, they need some structure. They need guidance. But you also need to give them the freedom to, explore.
To think outside the box.
Exactly.
Ries shares this example of a company that was, like, totally terrified of cannibalizing their own products.
Meaning?
They were so afraid that a new product would, like, steal customers from their existing products.
Oh, I see.
So they kept their innovation efforts completely separate.
Almost like a secret project?
Totally. And it totally backfired.
How so?
Because those siloed innovation efforts, they often just become stagnant.
They lack that energy, that momentum.
They do. And they don't have those feedback loops that are so crucial for real innovation.
Right, because they're not getting input from the rest of the company.
Exactly. And in the end, the fear of cannibalization becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's like they were so afraid of change that they ended up falling behind.
They did. So
Yeah.
how do you break out of that cycle? Like, how do you create a culture that's both successful and innovative?
That's the challenge a lot of companies face.
It is.
And Ries argues for a culture of experimentation.
Across the whole company.
Yeah, throughout the entire organization.
Not just in, like, those little pockets.
Exactly. And he uses this analogy of a management portfolio
Okay.
where you're constantly evaluating different initiatives.
So some things are working.
Some things aren't.
And you're nurturing the promising ones and letting go of the ones that,
That aren't panning out.
that aren't panning out. It's almost like you're a venture capitalist.
But for your own internal projects,
Yes.
you're placing bets.
Seeing which ones pay off.
Exactly.
And just like a VC, you need to be willing to cut your losses.
To walk away from those projects that aren't working.
Even if you've invested time and energy into them.
Tough decisions.
But necessary decisions.
And to make those decisions, you need a way to measure progress, right? Which brings us back to innovation accounting.
Full circle.
It's not just about tracking those vanity metrics. It's about asking the right questions. Like, are you moving the needle on those riskiest assumptions? Are you getting closer to product market fit?
Product market fit. That's another one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot.
It does.
But what does it actually mean?
Yeah, I feel like people use it in different ways.
It's that magical moment when you've built something that people really want.
And need.
Yes. When your product solves a real problem for a specific group of people.
So it's not just about building a cool product. It's about building the right product for the right people.
Exactly. And once you've achieved product market fit, you need to figure out how to grow.
How to scale.
And that's where those engines of growth come back in.
Right, the sticky, viral, and paid.
And it's about choosing the right engine.
For your specific business.
Yeah, because each engine has its own, set of metrics and strategies.
So give me an example.
Sure. If you're focused on viral growth, you'll be obsessed with this thing called the viral coefficient,
Okay.
which measures how many new customers each existing customer brings in. Oh, so it's like a chain reaction.
It is. Each new customer triggers more and more growth.
Exponential growth.
Yep.
But what if your engine's not viral? What if you're using, a paid acquisition model?
Then your focus shifts to things like customer acquisition cost
Okay.
and lifetime value. It becomes more of a numbers game.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It's not just about, coming up with a brilliant
fine.
idea.
No, it's about executing on that idea.
It's about understanding how to validate it, how to adapt, and then how to find that right way to grow. But what happens when, your engine starts to sputter? What if growth slows down or you hit a wall?
Well, that happens, and that's where pivoting becomes even more crucial.
But it's not just about randomly changing direction, right?
No, it's got to be strategic. You're using data, using customer feedback to make these informed decisions about how to adjust your course.
Course correction.
Exactly. And Ries goes into all these different types of pivots,
Right.
like customer segment pivots, platform pivots, even technology pivots.
So it's not just about changing your product. It could be about, changing who you're targeting.
It could. Or even the underlying technology that you're using.
Wow. So it's about being flexible and, being willing to re-examine your assumptions based on what you're learning in the market.
Exactly.
And he uses the story of Wealthfront, which started as, like this fantasy league for stock trading.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that about Wealthfront.
Yeah, their initial idea was to like identify these really talented amateur investors
Okay.
and give them this platform to like showcase their skills.
So like find the hidden gems.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when they started testing their assumptions, they found out something really surprising.
What was it?
Their target customer, like those amateur investors, they weren't interested in playing with like fake portfolios.
Makes sense.
They wanted help with managing their real money.
Ah, so they were solving a problem that didn't really exist.
Kind of, yeah. They had a solution looking for a problem.
That happens.
So they made this major pivot
Tell me about it.
and they shifted their focus to being this full-fledged investment management service, like a robo-advisor.
Which is what they're known for now.
It is. And it was super successful for them. But it wasn't just about changing their product.
It was about changing their whole business.
It was. Their target market, their pricing, everything.
That's a bold move.
It takes a lot of courage to do something like that, especially after you've already put so much into your initial idea.
It does. But it's a great example of how a pivot, when you do it right, can unlock huge growth.
Unlock the potential.
Yeah.
So it seems like even after you found like product market fit
Yeah.
and your engine of growth is working, the work is never really done.
It's not. That's the nature of startups. You're always evolving. The market's always changing.
As you grow,
You're going to face new challenges.
new opportunities.
Exactly.
Well,
And this is where those principles from the lean startup, they become even more important.
it's about building an organization that can handle all of that.
An organization that can adapt and respond to those changes.
It sounds both exhilarating and exhausting.
Right.
But this is where the principles of the lean startup come in, right?
They provide a framework for navigating all of that.
It's about building a company that's not just efficient, but also adaptable, innovative.
Resilient, able to bounce back from setbacks.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things is to foster a culture of continuous improvement.
So it's not just about building a product and launching it, right?
No, it's about constantly making it better.
It's a never-ending process of refining, iterating.
Learning from your mistakes.
So how do you actually do that?
Well, remember the 5 whys method?
Yeah.
That's a great place to start.
Okay.
It's about asking why over and over to get to that root cause of a problem. And you can apply it to anything.
Anything.
From customer complaints to marketing campaigns that aren't working.
You know, when you first mentioned the 5 whys, I was a little skeptical. It seemed too simple.
I get it.
But now I'm starting to see how it could be really powerful.
It can be.
Ries gives this example of IGN Entertainment using the 5 whys to solve these technical glitches they were having on their website.
They're having performance issues.
Yeah. And they kept trying to solve it by, like, throwing more resources at it.
More people, more money.
Yeah. But the issues kept coming back.
It was like they were putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem.
Exactly. So they had to dig deeper to find the real source of the issue.
And what did they find?
Using the 5 whys, they realized that a lot of their problems were coming from a lack of communication and collaboration.
Between different teams?
Yeah, they had engineers working in silos, and they weren't really testing their changes before going live.
Which can create all sorts of problems.
It can. But once they identified those root causes, they were able to put solutions in place that actually worked.
And they created a culture where people were encouraged to, like, raise issues and work together to solve them.
Yes. So even a large established company can benefit from adopting this more agile mindset.
A more problem-solving mindset.
Yes. It's making me think about all the times I've tried to solve a problem by just addressing the symptoms, instead of really understanding the root cause. But this continuous improvement thing, it's not just a one-time effort, right?
Definitely not. It's an ongoing process. You always have to be evaluating your systems, your processes, looking for ways to improve.
And being willing to experiment.
To try new things, even if they fail.
It sounds like you need a certain level of humility to be able to do that.
You do. You have to be able to admit that you don't have all the answers.
And be open to feedback.
Even when it's critical.
Yes. And how do you maintain that culture, especially as a company gets bigger? Things inevitably get more complex, right?
It's one of the biggest challenges.
It is. It's easy to get complacent, to think you've got it all figured out.
But the world keeps changing.
It does. So you have to constantly be challenging yourself, challenging the status quo.
And create an environment where people feel safe to take risks.
It's like you have to fight against the urge to get comfortable.
Stay hungry, stay curious, stay open to new ideas.
Exactly. And one of the ways to do that is by creating those innovation sandboxes we talked about earlier,
Right, those spaces where teams can experiment without fear of failure.
where they have the freedom to try new things.
And Ries uses this example of a company that was really struggling to keep up with all the changes in their industry.
They were falling behind.
They were stuck in this cycle of like incremental innovation, making small tweaks to their existing products.
But nothing groundbreaking.
No, nothing that really moved the needle. They were playing it safe, and it was hurting them.
So what did they do?
They decided to create an innovation sandbox.
Okay.
They put together this small team, gave them a budget, a timeline, and a set of goals. But they didn't tell them how to achieve those goals. They basically said, go explore, don't be afraid to break things.
So they created this space where failure was okay.
It was more than okay, it was encouraged.
Wow.
And it worked. This team came up with a bunch of groundbreaking ideas.
Ideas that disrupted their industry.
Exactly. And it's because they were given the freedom to experiment and to take risks.
So powerful. It seems like to make this whole thing work, you really need buy-in from leadership, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not enough to just like create a team and give them some money. Leaders need to be champions for innovation.
They need to walk the walk.
They do. They need to create a culture where people feel supported, where they feel like it's okay to try new things.
And they need to invest the resources.
Time, money, energy.
They need to show that they're serious about it.
Because if they don't, it's not going to work. And Ries even talks about the importance of having a chief entrepreneur.
Interesting. With that.
It's like someone who's responsible for driving innovation across the entire company.
So they're like a visionary.
Yeah, but also a cheerleader.
Okay.
And a pragmatist. Someone who can make things happen.
It sounds like a tough job.
It is. But a really important one. Especially in today's world, where things are changing so fast. Companies that don't embrace innovation, they're going to get left behind.
It's not just about, like, beating the competition, though.
No, it's about solving new problems, creating new opportunities.
It's about constantly pushing the boundaries.
Exactly. And Ries takes this idea even further. He says these principles aren't just relevant to businesses.
They could be applied to any organization.
Yeah, any organization that's facing uncertainty.
That's a big statement.
It is, but he's got a point. Think about government agencies, nonprofits, even schools.
They all need to adapt.
They do.
And he uses this example of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB.
Oh, yeah, the agency that's supposed to protect consumers from, like, predatory lending practices.
Exactly. Huge task.
Huge. And they were building this whole new agency from scratch.
Developing regulations, creating systems. It's the classic startup scenario, right?
Operating under extreme uncertainty.
Totally.
Yeah.
And Ries thinks they could have used the principles of a lean startup to be even more effective.
Like, how so?
Well, he suggests they could have started by, identifying their riskiest assumptions
Okay.
and then designing experiments to test them.
Instead of just launching these massive programs.
Exactly. So, for example, one of their key assumptions was that consumers would be eager to reach out to the CFPB for help.
Makes sense. That's their whole purpose.
Right. But instead of launching this huge national campaign, Ries says they could have done a smaller experiment.
Like a pilot program.
Exactly. They could have set up a hotline, maybe run some targeted ads in a specific city, and then just measured how many people actually called.
So gather data before making these huge commitments.
Yes. It's about validating your assumptions before you scale up.
That's smart.
And that's at the heart of the lean startup. It's about experimentation. It's about data-driven decision-making. It's about acknowledging that we don't always have the answers.
We have to be willing to learn.
And to experiment.
And sometimes to fail.
Yes. Failure is part of the process.
And Ries even argues that this approach is more humane.
More humane.
Yeah, because the traditional ways of managing, they often create this culture of fear.
Where people are afraid to speak up.
Exactly. They're afraid to take risks, afraid to make mistakes.
Which ultimately stifles creativity and innovation, right?
It does, but the lean startup encourages a different kind of culture.
One where people feel empowered.
Empowered, supported. Like, it's okay to try new things.
And to learn from your failures.
Exactly.
I like that. It's a much more positive approach.
And a more effective one, I think.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive into the lean startup, I think the key takeaway is that it's not just about tools and techniques. It's about a mindset.
A way of approaching the world.
That embraces uncertainty.
Encourages experimentation.
And celebrates learning.
Beautifully said.
Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore some more techniques for building that adaptive organization and fostering a culture of continuous improvement. Welcome back to our deep dive on the lean startup.
We're in the home stretch now.
We are. In this last part, we're going to look at some super practical techniques that Ries gives for building a company that can adapt and just continuously improve, you know?
Yeah, because it's one thing to grasp the concepts.
Right.
But putting them into practice is where the magic happens.
Totally. And one of the most powerful techniques he talks about is this idea of small batches.
Okay, small batches.
Now, this might sound more like something you'd hear, on a factory floor.
Right, like manufacturing.
Yeah, but it actually has huge implications for, how we work in any field, I think.
So how does it apply beyond, making widgets?
Well, it's about taking those big, complex tasks.
Yeah.
And breaking them down into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Smaller chunks.
Yeah, which, might seem counterintuitive. Right?
It does. Because we're often taught to do things in bulk.
We are. We think that's more efficient.
Bigger is better.
Right. But why is that not always the case?
Well, because working in those big batches, it can actually lead to delays, rework,
Oh, yeah.
and a slower feedback loop.
Slower feedback loop. Oh,
Yeah, it's like you're trying to steer this massive ship.
Oh, yeah.
It takes forever to change course,
Yeah, you're committed.
You are. But when you work in those smaller batches, you can get feedback faster.
Okay.
You can catch problems early. You can adapt quickly.
Makes you more agile.
It does. It's more like navigating a speedboat.
I love that.
You can make those quick turns.
You're more responsive.
You are.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
So less like a giant oil tanker, more like a little speedboat.
Exactly.
So Ries uses this amazing example from Toyota.
Oh, Toyota, like the kings of lean manufacturing.
Yes. They were one of the first to really use small batch production.
And it was a key part of their success.
It was. And one of the most fascinating things they did was implement this thing called the andon cord.
Andon cord.
Yeah. Which basically allowed any worker on the assembly line to stop production if
Right.
they saw a defect.
Wait, so they were empowered to halt the entire line?
They were.
That seems super risky.
I know, right? But Toyota realized that finding and fixing those problems right away
Yeah.
was way more efficient than, letting those faulty products get all the way through the system.
It's yeah, fix it now or pay for it later.
Yeah, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Totally. And Ries is saying that this applies to startups, too.
It does. The faster you catch those problems, the less waste you create.
And the faster you can learn and improve.
Exactly. He even talks about how his own company, IMVU, they actually implemented something called continuous deployment. Have you heard of that?
Continuous deployment, yeah. It's
Yeah,
like releasing new code super frequently.
Multiple times a day. Which, sounds crazy to anyone who's, used to traditional software development.
Right, where you plan releases months in advance.
Yeah, but IMVU figured out that the faster they could get code in front of their customers, the faster they got that feedback.
And the faster they could improve.
It was just this, constant cycle.
Testing, getting feedback, refining,
Over and over again.
shortening that feedback loop.
It's like building in those course corrections from the start.
It is. It's about building a culture of continuous iteration.
Okay. This is really making me think about how we often wait until something's, finished before we get feedback.
Right? We want it to be perfect.
Yeah. But maybe there's a way to incorporate this, small batch thinking into other areas of our work, too.
Absolutely. I think there is.
But hold on. Doesn't releasing things so quickly kind of increase the risk of sacrificing quality?
It's a valid concern. And IMVU actually addressed that by building this, sophisticated system
Okay.
to support their continuous deployment process. So they had automated tests that ran every time they pushed new code. And they had a team that was specifically dedicated to monitoring for any issues.
So they had, safeguards in place.
They did. It wasn't just throwing stuff out there and hoping for the best.
Right. And this whole small batches thing, it's not just for software either.
No, it's not.
Reed says it applies to any type of work.
Marketing campaigns, customer service.
Yeah, anything where you can break down a task into those smaller chunks.
And get feedback along the way.
It makes so much sense. This reminds me of this time when I was working on a big presentation and I was totally stuck.
It happens to the best of us.
It does. And a colleague suggested I just break it down into smaller
How
sections.
did that help?
It was a game changer. I could get feedback on each part as I went, and it made the whole process so much smoother.
That's awesome.
Okay, so we've talked about small batches, continuous improvement, but let's circle back to those innovation sandboxes we were talking about earlier.
Right, those teams that had so much freedom to experiment.
Yeah, and they were getting some amazing results.
They were.
But how do you actually take those innovations and bring them back into the core business?
That's the tough part. A lot of companies, they create these separate teams, but they struggle to actually integrate the cool stuff they come up with into the main business.
It's almost like they're speaking different languages.
It can feel that way. And Ries suggests you got to create a system for actually transferring the knowledge and the best practices.
So you need a bridge between the two.
They do. Think like regular presentations, cross-functional workshops,
Oh, okay.
or even having employees from different departments like temporarily work with the innovation team.
So they can cross-pollinate ideas
Exactly. It's about breaking down those silos and creating a culture of collaboration.
where everyone's sharing knowledge.
Right. And this can't just be like a one-time thing either.
It's going to be ongoing.
Ongoing, so that innovation can flow throughout the entire organization.
So new ideas can be tested,
Refined.
and then, if they're successful,
You can scale them up.
bring them into the core business.
Make them part of the DNA of the company.
But for this to really work, you need the leaders on board, right?
Oh, 100%. It's not enough to just set up a team and throw some money at them.
The leaders have to be the champions for innovation.
They have to set the tone. They have to create that culture.
And they have to be willing to, invest the resources that are needed.
Show that they're serious about it.
Yeah, walk the walk.
Yeah.
And Ries actually highlights the importance of having a chief entrepreneur.
I've heard of that.
What is that?
It's someone who's specifically responsible for driving innovation.
Across the entire organization?
Yeah.
So it's like a visionary, but also a doer.
They got to be both. They got to be able to inspire people, but also get things done.
Lead by example.
Yeah. And that role is becoming so important in today's world.
Because if you don't innovate,
You're going to get left behind.
yeah. But it's not just about staying ahead of the competition.
No, it's about creating new value.
Solving new problems.
Right.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the lean startup, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Ooh, I like this. Hit us with it.
Think about your own work, your projects, even just your life in general. Where are you operating in that space of uncertainty?
We're all in that space to some extent, right?
We are. How could you apply these principles of the lean startup, like the validated learning, the experimentation, the continuous improvement?
To navigate those uncertain waters.
Yes, and achieve even greater success.
It's a question we should all be asking ourselves, because the lean startup, it's not just a book. It's not just a set of rules.
That's a way of thinking.
It is. It's a philosophy.
And as Eric Ries says, the ability to learn and adapt is our biggest asset in a world that never stops changing.
So true.
So embrace uncertainty.
Experiment fearlessly.
And never stop learning.
Love it.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the lean startup. You can find links to all the resources we've talked about in the show notes. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.